Okay, part 3, Indoctrination of a Nation. We are going over the historical highlights of education in America, and we are now in 1931. Another court battle known as Alvarez versus the Board of Trustees of the Lemon Grove, California, School District. The first school to successfully desegregate in court. Well, let's hear it for Lemon Grove School. Kicking and screaming all the way, forced to do it. This was followed in 1946, by the way, by as precedent by Mendez versus Westminster and the California Board of Education. A major precedent to Brown versus the Board of Education, which we will cover in a moment. Things have a way of dominoing. 1946, a commission establishes a network of community colleges to increase enrollment for veterans, which then expands and becomes community colleges in almost all urban areas throughout the country. 1946, Congress approves the National School Lunch Act. So if you're wondering why kids are now being fed by schools requiring more money, that's when it happened. 1948, another legal precedent in McCollum versus Board of Education. The Supreme Court, this is national now, ruled that it cannot allow the release time to allow students to participate in religious education in public school classrooms. The beginning of the attack on religion in schools, 1948. The pretty liberal Supreme Court said that you can no longer have what they call release time, or separate time to study have religious education in a public classroom. In 1954, one of the greatest legal outcomes in history, Brown versus the Board of Education, formally ruled that segregation in schools is unconstitutional, overturning Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896. Now, some have argued that the result of Brown versus Board of Education led to worse times for minorities, blacks specifically, in school. Whether or not that is statistically correct or not is immaterial. The unconstitutional racist nature of Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal, this segregation of schools, was much more of a horrific issue and had to be dealt with, whatever the outcome and fallout of that decision was. It had to be done. It should have been done a lot sooner before that, which might have lessened the impact, negatively or otherwise, but it had to be done. And it was done. And it was done by during the time of a Republican president and his guy he put onto the Supreme Court. 1959, the ACT test is first administered. 1962, Engel versus Vitale, or Vitale, I'm not sure how it's pronounced. The Supreme Court rules that required prayers in a New York school or in New York schools violates the First Amendment. Now, I can understand required prayers in New York schools being against the First Amendment, because that says maybe what they felt was that a state is advocating a certain religion. They weren't saying what religion they were praying to, therefore it does not actually violate the First Amendment, which picks and chooses the winners, was put in there to avoid the government picking and choosing the winners of which religions are advocated and which are not, or more than it was put in to advocate that religion itself is advocated or not. The liberals like to twist that and make it in their favor, that it was some kind of secular anti-religious amendment. It wasn't. It was simply saying that the government has no business picking which religion they were going to back, so they back none and allow people to back whichever one they want. So if people are participating in required prayers, this would only be a violation if the required prayers was of one religion only. And it may have been. I don't know. I didn't dig that far. But it is the beginning of a bad trend. Because in 1963, the school district of Abington Township, Pennsylvania, versus Shemp, someone named Shemp. That's not the Three Stooges guy. Reaffirms Engel versus Vital and adds that prayers cannot be recited in school, required or not, even if the students are allowed to be excused from participating. So let me get this right. If the First Amendment says that the government, state, municipal, whatever, cannot pick and choose the winners of religion. They cannot advocate one religion over another or get in the way of anybody from practicing their religion. And the school allows students who do not want to participate in prayers to leave voluntarily, and allows the kids in school to participate in prayers voluntarily. How is the First Amendment effective? Who's sanctioning what? It's coming from the kids. It's not being forced. It's not being advocated one way or the other. No winners or losers. Kid wants to practice his Hebrew religion in school, his Islamic religion in school. That's not saying that they can't. And if someone doesn't want to be in an atmosphere where prayers are being done, they can leave. No harm, no foul. But no, Supreme Court said, or at least the Pennsylvania court said, acting on a precedent, no bueno. Guess how long that took for all the states to adopt? 1964, the War on Poverty by LBJ provides federal funds to help low-income students, initiating Title I and bilingual education. Diverting money, diverting time, diverting energy away from what's really important. Now we're in the business of helping to not just get education to people who are poor, because it was meant to be completely integrated in terms of rich and poor, black and white, and all that. When it all started, the parents were their job to get the kids to school, and after that, now it's our job to make sure that they're cared for, they're eating. We become the parents, or the schools become the parents. Also in 1965, Project Head Start begins, and it never ends. Like lots of things that began in 1965. War on Poverty, food stamps programs, Medicare expansion, welfare expansion. You get my idea. Also in 1965, banner year for the left, the Immigration Act of 1965 results in unprecedented numbers of Asians and Hispanics immigrating to the United States and into the classrooms. Immigration in and of itself, not a bad thing. Prior to 1965, immigration was virtually banned in the United States. Eventually it was going to have to open up. Okay, great. This is just a headline that leads to other stuff. They didn't have bilingual education required before, but now that all these immigrants are here, suddenly it's required. 1968, Hello, the Bilingual Education Act is passed. Title VII is replaced in 2002 and replaced by No Child Left Behind Act after that, or as the No Child Left Behind Act, which of course expanded it. 1968, also, McCarver Elementary School in Tacoma, Washington becomes the first magnet school. 1969, Herbert Cole publishes The Open Classroom, which promotes open education instead of traditional means of teaching. Just another progressive Looney Tune idea. 1972, Title IX is passed, ending discrimination in sports based on sex. 1974, Lau versus Nichols and the Equal Opportunities Act force schools to provide English language instruction. That's nice. We're talking about English language instruction to those who don't speak it, and leads to more non-English classroom instruction. So while they're forcing them to learn English, it seems, they're also creating classrooms where English isn't even spoken. Equal opportunity, folks. Diverting money, energy, and attention from what's important. 1974, forced busing begins in Boston, Massachusetts. Notice Boston and Massachusetts is the center, the epicenter of almost all education in this country in terms of change and progress. However, in Milligrew versus Bradley, I think I have that right, or Millison versus Bradley, the Supreme Court rules that suburbs are not responsible for integrating the urban cities, ruling against long-distance busing, meaning they said that a black living in the suburb should not be forced to go be schooled in the urban areas just to make the urban areas more diverse. Not cool, not fair. How long did that last? 1974, a story in Newsweek, Why Johnny Can't Write. It was actually a book, but I guess it was a story in Newsweek first, whatever. Gives impetus to the Back to the Basics movement. A good thing. And a good book. 1980, President Carter signs the Refugee Act of 1980 and the Refugee Educational Assistance Act, resulting in another 3 million immigrants, bringing special needs and issues to the classrooms. Vast majorities would have been Vietnamese and Cambodians and Laotians following the Vietnam War. But here we go again. Educate, though, they're not citizens. They're not necessarily giving into society or paying high taxes, but our taxes are going towards them. Once again, reassigning where our energies and money goes. 1981, John Holt's book, Teach Your Own, A Hopeful Path for Education, adds momentum to the homeschooling movement. Also a good thing. Back to basics, how it started, homeschooling. 1982, Edwards versus Aguillard, Supreme Court invalidates Louisiana's Creationism Act, which required teaching creationism whenever evolutionism was taught. It said it violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. Well, here we go again. There's no problem teaching evolution in school anymore. But God forbid we should teach creationism. Because unlike teaching evolution, which is not tied to religion, creationism is. And that somehow is a violation of establishing a religion. But creationism is believed in almost all religion. So exactly which religion is being established? If they're all being established, that is not what the First Amendment was meant to stop. The establishment of religion. Simply the establishment of a single, particular religion. It advocated that people can have their religion. And in that, they believed in creationism. Whether it's right or wrong, whether it's accurate or not. And they weren't even doing it solely by itself. They were simply trying to balance evolution theory with creation theory. And it gets worse and worse and worse. 1982, in Plyler versus Doe, the Supreme Court ruled that Texas law, which denied access by undocumented school-aged children to public schools, violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. 1984, Emergency Immigration Education Act. Emergency! Okay. Who was running Congress in 84? Is that Democrats? I don't know. Might have been Republicans, so shame on them. Provides funds to offset costs accrued by school districts that have unexpectedly large amounts of immigrant students. This was increased again in 1994. Throwing money at schools as the answer for everything. 1985, Wallace versus Jaffrey. The Supreme Court ruled that allowing silent prayer, and teacher-led voluntary prayer in schools violates the First Amendment. So here we are. Step by step, incrementally, slippery slope. This little thing's now illegal. Now this bigger thing's illegal. Now the whole damn thing is illegal. Silent prayer or teacher-led voluntary prayer in school, no bueno. How in God's name, pun intended, is that a violation of the First Amendment? 1989 through 90, Mumford High School in Detroit, Michigan, is the first school to use metal detectors for school safety. You can read into that what you will. 1992, first charter school opens in St. Paul, Minnesota. 1994, the Sandia Report is published, which refutes the findings of a 1983 Nation at Risk report, which said U.S. student education proficiency was in decline. Despite multiple studies showing issues in learning, such as proficiency gaps, premature grade promotion, and etc. The program for international student assessment in 2013, for instance, also belies this. Now, let me give you a little history on this. Nation at Risk report in 1983 was thought to be a politically motivated report by the left because it completely destroyed the progressive education movement in schools. Ronald Reagan, George Bush later, used this report to try to push the back to basics movement in schools. The left didn't like Reagan, and they didn't like right-wing movement, don't like right-wing movements, they don't like back to basics, they don't like traditionalism, they don't like history, and so they immediately jumped on or instituted a means to refute the Nation at Risk report. The liberals in this country funded the Sandia report, which would have come out during George Bush's time. They claim he suppressed it, withheld it until he was no longer president. And Clinton put it out, which refuted it. The problem with the Sandia report is that every study done before or since has shown that the Sandia report must have been politically motivated because it is garbage. It doesn't make any sense. It is based on refutable data, etc., etc. We will finish this and get into some other things in part 4. We'll see you then.